Lost in the rain, a veteran Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd K9 followed a light in the Maine woods. They only needed shelter for one night. But inside the lonely cabin was an elderly woman about to lose her home. Someone wanted her land, her cabin, and the truth buried forever. Then the K9 sensed something hidden beneath the old floorboards. One stormy night became a fight to save her last home. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to Veteran and Dog. Rain came down over northern Maine like a gray curtain lowered by tired hands. It swept across the pine ridges, silvered the birch trunks, and darkened the red maple leaves until the forest looked freshly painted and half forgotten. The mountain road bent through the trees in a narrow ribbon of mud, vanishing every few yards beneath fog and rainwater. Torrin Hayes drove with both hands on the wheel of an old dark pickup that had seen better roads and kinder weather. He was 43 years old, a former Navy SEAL with broad shoulders, a solid body shaped by years of Special Forces training, and the quiet stillness of a man who had learned not to waste movement. His angular face carried a clear jawline, sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, and light stubble that made him look older when he was tired. His deep gray blue eyes watched the road as if every bend might hide a threat. His tan skin and short dark brown military haircut, silvering early at the temples, gave him the appearance of a man built for hard places and worse memories. He wore the same clothes he wore almost everywhere now. A slightly worn olive field jacket, a red and dark blue plaid shirt beneath it, dark blue cargo pants, brown leather boots scuffed by years of use, and an old military watch on his left wrist. Beside him in the passenger seat, Alder sat upright. Alder was a 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9, lean and muscular, with a short, thick black and tan coat, a dark saddle across his back, a black face and ears, warm tan legs, and a muzzle touched lightly with gray. His deep amber eyes never truly rested. They moved from the windshield to the side mirror, from the trees to Torrin's hands, reading the world in scents, sounds, and small changes humans usually missed. Around his neck was a sturdy black leather collar with a scratched metal K9 tag that clicked softly whenever the truck bounced. Torrin had left the timber yard less than an hour earlier. The job had lasted 3 days. 3 days of standing near stacked lumber, checking gates, watching trucks roll in and out. 3 days of diesel fumes, chains rattling, men shouting over machinery, and radio static cracking from the foreman's belt. It should have been easy work, honest work, quiet enough for most men, but on the third afternoon a circular saw screamed through a wet beam, and the sound became something else inside Torrin's head. Not Maine, not rain, not timber. For one breath, he was back under a white sun with dust in his mouth and a voice breaking through a radio, calling his name from a place he could not reach. He had walked away before anyone saw his hands shake. He told himself he was only leaving a job that did not fit. He told himself he preferred back roads because towns made too much noise. He told himself many things. Alder had said nothing, of course. But the dog had watched him with those steady amber eyes, and sometimes that was worse than being questioned. The rain thickened. A warning sign leaned crookedly beside the road, half hidden by wet brush. Torrin slowed the truck. Ahead, a small wooden bridge crossed a swollen creek. Water rushed over one side, brown and angry, carrying broken twigs and foam. Not worth it, Torrin muttered. He shifted into reverse, but the rear tires spun in mud. The truck slid sideways, bumped hard, and died with a cough that sounded almost embarrassed. Torrin tried the ignition twice. Nothing. He sat still for a moment, listening to raindrum on the roof. "Of course," he said. Alder turned his head. "Don't look at me like that. You wanted fresh air." The dog blinked once, unimpressed. Torrin checked his phone, no signal. 12% battery. The GPS map showed a useless blue dot floating somewhere inside a green wilderness. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and studied the trees. A younger man might have panicked. Torrin did not. Panic was a luxury he had never been good at. He had a pack behind the seat, a poncho, a knife, a lighter, a small first aid kit, 2 protein bars, and enough training to make one wet night in the woods survivable. But survival was not the same as rest. That was the part nobody taught you. A man could survive deserts, gunfire, winter oceans, and nights without sleep. Then one ordinary afternoon, a radio crackled in the wrong tone, and his own chest became the battlefield. Torrin opened the door. Rain hit him cold and hard. Alder jumped down after him, paws landing in the mud with controlled strength. Torrin clipped on the black tactical leash, shouldered his pack, and looked back toward the road they had come from. "We head south," he said. "Find the main road." Alder did not move. The dog stood very still, head turned toward the dense forest east of the road. His ears lifted, his nostrils widened, his body lowered by an inch, not in fear but in focus. Torrin watched him. "What is it?" Alder pulled once toward the trees. "No." The dog pulled again. Torrin's jaw tightened. "Alder, heel." Alder obeyed halfway. He stepped close, but his head remained fixed toward the forest, every muscle alert. That was when Torrin heard it. Not clearly. Not enough for a normal man to trust. A thin metallic tapping somewhere beyond the rain. Irregular, soft, like a chain striking glass. Alder heard it better. Or smelled what came with it. Smoke. Wood smoke, faint as a memory, threaded through wet pine and mud. Torin looked into the trees. There was no driveway, no visible roofline, no sign of another human being. Just a narrow animal trail twisting between moss-covered stones and white birch trunks. "We don't know what's out there," he said. Alder looked back at him, and for a moment, Torin remembered a night years ago when the dog had refused to enter an alley overseas, planting his paws exactly like this. 3 minutes later, a hidden wire had been found across the entrance. Every time Alder had been this stubborn, there had been a reason. Torin rubbed rain from his face. "Fine," he whispered. "But if this is a porcupine, I'm telling everyone you lost your edge." Alder moved immediately. They left the road behind. The forest accepted them in silence. Rain softened the ground beneath their boots and paws. Ferns brushed Torin's knees. Birch bark shone pale in the fading light, and red maple leaves clung to branches like small, stubborn flames refusing to surrender to the storm. It should have felt dark. Somehow it did not. The forest seemed wide and solemn, like an old cathedral built by roots and weather. Even the rain had a rhythm to it, steady as breath. Torin followed Alder up a low rise, across a shallow runoff stream, and between two leaning pines. The dog moved with purpose, stopping now and then to listen, then pressing forward. The metallic tapping grew clearer, so did the smell of smoke. Then, through the rain and mist, Torin saw a warm golden light. It glowed between the trees, small but steady, like a candle cupped in two hands. A cabin stood on the hillside. It was old, built of dark weathered logs with a stone chimney and a wide front porch. A lantern hung from a beam near the door, swinging slightly in the wind. Each time it moved, its metal frame tapped against the hook. A half-fallen wooden sign stood near the path, its carved letters softened by age. Lantern Hollow. Torin stopped at the edge of the clearing. He did not like approaching homes uninvited. Homes meant questions. Questions meant stories. Stories meant the kind of pity people gave when they did not know what else to offer. He looked at the porch. "We wait there until the rain lets up. That's all." Alder ignored the plan. The German shepherd walked straight up the steps, water dripping from his coat, and sat before the front door with the posture of a sentry reporting for duty. Torin stared at him. "You've got to be kidding." Alder did not turn around. Before Torin could reach the porch, the lantern above the door swung hard, though the wind had suddenly gone still. Its light flashed across Alder's wet face, and the old K9 tag on the dog's collar gave one clear metallic click. Inside the cabin, something answered. Not a voice, not a footstep, a soft thump like a memory shifting behind a wall. Alder lowered his head and gave a quiet whine, the kind he had made only twice before in his life. Once beside a wounded soldier, and once beside a grave Torin had not wanted to visit. For the first time that evening, Torin felt something colder than rain move across his shoulders. Then the cabin door opened. An elderly woman stood in the warm light. Mara Whitlock was 71, small and slender, with a straightness in her posture that age had bent but not broken. Her gray-silver hair was tied in a low, neat bun at the nape of her neck, with a few loose strands resting near her temples. Her face was softly wrinkled, her pale blue eyes kind but carrying a sadness so deep it seemed to have learned patience. She wore a thick cream cardigan over a pale gray-blue dress, a light brown apron tied at her waist, soft brown leather flats, and a small necklace with an old lantern charm resting against her chest. Her hands, thin and veined, held the edge of the door. They trembled slightly, not from fear but from age, or perhaps from the sight of the dog on her porch. Torin straightened. He knew what he looked like, a large, wet stranger with a military bearing standing in the rain at the door of a woman who lived alone. "Mom," he said, keeping his voice low, "sorry to bother you. Truck died near the bridge. I was wondering if my dog and I could sit on your porch until the rain eases up." Mara looked at him for only a second. Then her eyes returned to Alder. The dog did not bark. He simply held her gaze, calm and watchful, rain running along the dark fur of his muzzle. Mara's expression changed, not surprise exactly, not fear, recognition maybe, but not of Alder himself, of something he carried. "It has been a long time," she said softly, "since I saw a working dog stand guard on this porch." Torin felt his grip tighten on the leash. "He won't cause trouble. I can see that. I don't have money for a room. I didn't ask. I'll leave as soon as the weather breaks." Mara opened the door wider. Warmth rolled out, carrying the smell of cedarwood, bread, and herbal tea. "No one waits out a mountain storm on the porch of Lantern Hollow," she said. "Not a man, not a dog. Come inside." Torin hesitated. Alder did not. He stood, stepped across the threshold, and entered as if he had been invited long before the door opened. Torin had followed dogs into worse places. He stepped inside. The cabin was small but deeply alive. A stone fireplace filled the room with amber light. Books lined one wall. A kettle sat on an iron stove. Old quilts hung over the backs of chairs. Everything bore the marks of use and care. Polished wood, mended fabric, a cracked mug placed beside a reading chair. Torrin noticed exits first. Front door, back hall, kitchen window. Habit, not choice. Mara noticed him noticing. "You can sit where you see the door," she said, not unkindly. That almost made him smile. Almost. Alder crossed the room and lay down before the fireplace. His body softened in a way Torrin had not seen in weeks. The dog rested his head on his paws, eyes half closing, as though the fire had spoken a language only he understood. Mara brought towels. Torrin accepted one with a stiff nod. "Thank you. You're welcome." She moved slowly but with purpose, the way nurses did even after retirement, as if every room still contained someone who might need tending. She placed a bowl of water near Alder, then set a kettle on the stove. "Tea?" she asked. Torrin nearly refused. He was good at refusing. Food, help, comfort, kindness. Refusal kept the account clean. But the rain beat against the roof, and Alder was already drinking from the bowl. "Yes, Mom," he said. While Mara prepared tea, Torrin's gaze moved to the mantel. There were photographs there, carefully dusted. One showed Mara younger, standing outside a small clinic in a white nurse's uniform, her smile bright and unguarded. Another showed a tall man in an old ranger jacket, lean and sun-browned, with one arm around her shoulders. A third showed a young man with wind-blown hair and laughing eyes, kneeling beside a German shepherd with a dark face, tan legs, and a rescue harness. Torrin stepped closer despite himself. The dog in the photograph was not Alder. Older, broader through the chest, with a white mark near one ear, but the posture was familiar, alert, loyal, planted between danger and the person he loved. Mara followed his gaze. "That was North," she said. "A working dog? Search and rescue." Her voice softened. "He belonged to my son, Jonah." Torrin looked at the young man in the photograph. Jonah Whitlock had the open face of someone who still believed courage could bring everyone home. Early 20s, maybe. Strong hands, bright eyes. A smile too alive for an old photograph. Torrin knew better than to ask too much. Loss had a shape. Veterans recognized it. So did mothers. "He looks like he was good with him," Torrin said. Mara smiled faintly. North obeyed Jonah most of the time. The rest of the time, North obeyed God and expected Jonah to catch up. A dry laugh escaped Torrin before he could stop it. Alder lifted one ear from the fireplace. Mara's smile widened, just a little. "Your dog seems familiar with that arrangement." Unfortunately, the room changed then. Not much. Just enough. A cabin that had been holding its breath exhaled. Later, after tea and a bowl of soup Torrin did not remember agreeing to eat, Mara showed him the old armchair near the front window. "You can sleep there if you like," she said. "It faces the door." Torrin nodded. "I appreciate it. I know." That answer unsettled him more than questions would have. Mara banked the fire. Outside, rain continued to fall through the dark forest. Inside, the lantern's light trembled softly across the windows. Torrin removed his wet jacket but kept his boots on. He sat in the chair, arms folded, eyes drifting toward the door. Alder lay before the hearth, breathing slow and deep. For a few minutes, Torrin allowed himself to believe the night might pass quietly. Then Alder's eyes opened. The dog lifted his head. His ears came forward. Torrin sat up at once. "What is it?" Alder rose without a sound and walked to the rug before the fireplace. He lowered his nose to the floorboards and sniffed along one seam. Then he raised one paw and scratched gently. Once, twice. A hollow sound answered beneath the wood. Mara, standing in the hallway with a folded quilt in her arms, went very still. Alder scratched again. The old floorboard gave a soft, empty knock like something hidden below had been waiting a very long time to be heard. Morning came to Lantern Hollow quietly, as if the forest did not want to wake the house too soon. The rain had passed some time before dawn. Thin sunlight slipped through the wet pines and scattered across the windows in pale gold. Outside, every branch held a trembling drop of water. The birches stood white and clean. The red maples shone like embers washed by rain, and the mountain air smelled of cedar, soaked earth, and wood smoke. Torrin Hayes woke before the old clock in the kitchen struck 6. He had not meant to sleep. Men like him rarely admitted they needed rest, and even when rest came, it usually arrived armed with old voices. But the chair near the window had held him through the night, and the fire had burned low without dying. His boots were still on. His olive field jacket was folded across the armrest. His old military watch ticked against his wrist like a patient reminder that he had survived another night. Alder lay near the front door, not beside the hearth now, not sprawled in comfort. The German Shepherd K9 had positioned himself across the threshold, his black and tan body stretched like a living barricade. His deep amber eyes opened the moment Torrin moved. Torrin looked at him and whispered, "Don't start." Alder did not wag his tail. Torrin stood slowly, careful not to let the floor creak. The sensible thing was to leave before kindness became a conversation. He could return to the truck, try the engine again, find the main road, disappear into another small town where nobody knew his name and nobody looked at him as if he might still be worth saving. He took one step toward the door. Alder lifted his head. Torrin stopped. "We don't belong here." The dog's ears tilted forward, calm and stubborn. "You heard me." Alder lowered his chin back onto his paws, but he did not move aside. From the kitchen came the gentle sound of a cup being set on wood. "You may as well argue with the stove," Mara Whitlock said. "It listens about as well." Torrin turned. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee. In the morning light, she seemed smaller than she had the night before, but not weaker. Her cream cardigan hung loosely from her narrow shoulders. Her gray-silver hair was pinned in a low bun, and a few wisps had escaped near her temples. The little lantern charm at her throat caught the light when she moved. She did not ask why he was leaving. That was the first mercy of the morning. She simply handed him a mug. Torrin accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, Mom." "Mara," she said. He hesitated. She raised one eyebrow. "Torrin," he answered. "I know, you told me last night." "I did?" "You were half asleep and very formal." It was almost impressive. A dry smile touched the corner of his mouth before he could stop it. "Sorry. Don't be." Formal men usually fix things before breakfast. He looked toward the back of the cabin, where the rear door sat crooked in its frame. Mara followed his gaze. "That latch sticks. If you are determined to pay for coffee, you can start there." Fixing a latch was easier than accepting charity, easier than explaining why a grown man had no place he needed to be. So Torrin drank half the coffee, set the mug down, and asked where she kept the tools. By 7, he had repaired the back latch. By 8, he had tightened a loose hinge, cleared wet leaves from the porch steps, and found a leak beginning near the roofline where the old tin flashing had pulled away. Lantern Hollow was not falling apart exactly. It was simply aging faster than Mara's hands could keep up. The porch rail had a soft wobble. The fence behind the herb garden leaned toward the woods. The woodshed door had swollen from moisture. A section of gutter sagged like a tired shoulder. Mara watched from the kitchen window while pretending not to. Alder roamed the yard in slow circles, his nose low, his black leather collar dark against his thick fur. He paused near the tree line several times, not alarmed, but attentive. Every so often he looked back toward the cabin, checking both Torrin and Mara as if they had become part of one patrol. "You don't have to do all this," Mara called from the porch. Torrin tightened a screw in the railing. "I know." That was not an answer. It was the one I had. She folded her arms. "You always this difficult?" "No, Mom. Sometimes I'm asleep." Mara blinked, then laughed. The laugh surprised her. It was small, rusty from disuse, but real. Torrin heard it and looked down at the railing as if the wood had suddenly become important. A laugh could be dangerous. It made a place feel less temporary. After breakfast, the cabin settled into a softer rhythm. Mara poured fresh coffee, sliced warm bread, and moved carefully around the kitchen with the practiced grace of a retired nurse. She never rushed, but nothing she did was wasted. Torrin noticed the slight tremor in her right hand when she lifted the kettle. He noticed how she hid pain in her fingers by folding them inside her apron. Alder noticed, too. The dog stood and walked to her side when she winced near the stove. He did not jump or nudge. He simply stood close, a steady warmth against her leg. Mara looked down at him. For one breath, her face changed so completely that Torrin felt he had stepped into a room where grief had been waiting in a chair. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. Alder's tail moved once. Torrin said nothing. Later, Mara led him to the old photographs on the mantel. She did not touch them at first. Her eyes rested on the picture of Jonah and the rescue dog North, both caught in a summer moment beside a river that looked too gentle to have ever taken anything from anyone. "Jonah was 26 when he died," she said. "He had his father's shoulders and my stubbornness. Dangerous combination." Torrin studied the photograph. Jonah Whitlock had wind-tossed brown hair, a lean rescuer's build, and a grin that seemed too bright for a frame holding a dead man's memory. North sat beside him in a faded rescue harness, broad-chested, dark-faced, alert even in stillness. "He worked search and rescue?" Torrin asked. "Volunteer, paid in sandwiches, bad weather, and people's gratitude." Mara's smile trembled. "He said gratitude tasted better than money if you were hungry enough. What happened?" Mara looked toward the window where sunlight glittered on wet pine needles. Spring flood. A family got trapped near Raven Cut. Jonah and North found them before the county team did. He got 3 people across a rope line. She paused. The bank gave way before he could cross. Torrin felt the old pressure in his chest, the familiar weight of a decision made in seconds and carried for years. And North came home alone with a strip of Jonah's jacket in his teeth. Mara's voice thinned, but did not break. "After that, I told myself I could not bear another dog in this house." Alder sat at her feet, watching her with impossible patience. Mara reached down, slowly, and rested her fingers on his head. The moment Mara touched Alder, the old lantern charm on her necklace slipped free from her cardigan and swung once against the wood of the table. Alder froze, not in fear, in recognition. He lifted his muzzle toward the charm, then turned his head toward the fireplace with the quiet certainty of a dog following an old scent through time. Mara's hand tightened slightly in his fur. "My son used to wear that charm on rescue calls," she said, barely above a whisper. "He said every lost person needed to see a light coming." Torin looked from the necklace to Alder, and for reasons he could not explain, the cabin suddenly felt less like a shelter from rain, and more like a place that had been waiting for a sound only the dog could hear. They did not speak for several minutes after that. The silence was not empty. It carried Jonah's name, North's memory, and Torin's own dead, though he had not offered them to the room. At last, Torin turned his attention to the place in the floor near the hearth. "I should check that board," he said. Mara's face tightened. "You don't have to." "No, but something's under there. You sound certain." Torin glanced at Alder. "He is." Alder stood nearby, calm now, nose lowered toward the seam in the floorboards. Torin took a small pry bar from the toolbox and knelt. He worked slowly, careful not to damage the old wood. Mara stood near the table with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug. When the board lifted, a smell rose from beneath it. Dust, old pine, metal, and dry leather. Torin reached into the narrow space between the joists and pulled out a rectangular tin box wrapped in dark oilcloth. The box was aged but intact. Its corners were rusted. On the lid, someone had etched the shape of a lantern, simple and steady. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. "I have lived in this house for 15 years, she said. "I never knew." Torin placed the box on the table and stepped back. "It's yours." Mara sat slowly. Her hands trembled as she untied the oilcloth and opened the lid. Inside lay a leather journal, several yellowed envelopes tied with blue thread, old black and white photographs, a brass rescue whistle, and a worn metal tag stamped with one word, North. Alder sniffed once, then sat down. Mara picked up the tag as if it were a bone from a saint. "My lord," she whispered. "Jonah thought this was lost." Torin watched her grief move through her face, not like a storm this time, but like sunlight finding a locked room. Beneath the tag was a journal. The name written inside the cover belonged to Clara Whitlock. Mara explained that Clara was her great-grandmother, a tall, stern mountain woman with dark hair, strong hands, and a will that could outlast winter. In an old photograph tucked between the pages, Clara stood beside the half-built cabin in a long dark dress and work boots, her jaw set, her eyes fierce. She looked like the kind of woman who would argue with a blizzard and expected to apologize. Mara began reading. The words were neat, careful, and faded. Lantern Hollow was raised after the winter storm of 1929, not for pride, not for property, but for mercy. Let this house never become a locked box for one family's sorrow. Let it be a lamp for the traveler, the widow, the soldier, the frightened child of God who thinks no road leads home. Mara stopped. Torin looked toward the windows. The wet forest shone beyond the glass, bright and green and washed clean. But his mind had gone somewhere else, toward a voice on a radio, toward a man he had not reached, toward the terrible arithmetic of saving some and losing one. Mara unfolded the letters. They read for most of the afternoon. There was a miner who had wandered from camp during a whiteout and been found half frozen beside the creek. A nurse who had collapsed on the porch after caring for influenza patients for 6 days without rest. A World War II veteran who could not bring himself to enter his own hometown and slept instead by Clara's fire until morning. A widow traveling with her brother's address, sewn into her coat lining because she was afraid of forgetting it. Every story began with fear. Every story turned on a door opening. At some point, Mara stopped wiping her eyes. At some point, Torin stopped pretending the words had not reached him. He had spent years believing that survival was a debt, that because he lived, he owed the dead a punishment paid in distance, silence, and loneliness. But this house had been built by people who believed the opposite. It said the living owed the lost not endless guilt, but continued mercy. Alder rested near the hearth with North's old tag on the table above him, as if standing watch over 2 generations of loyalty. Near evening, a truck engine rattled up the road. Mara stiffened. Torin moved instinctively toward the window. An elderly man climbed from a weathered pickup outside, carrying a folded envelope in one hand. He was lean but sturdy, about 76, with a sun-weathered face, deep wrinkles around his eyes, sharp brown eyes beneath a gray knit cap, and short white stubble along his jaw. His old moss-brown ranger jacket was darkened at the shoulders from damp air. A dark green flannel shirt showed beneath it, tucked into faded jeans over forest boots. "That's Eben Pike," Mara said. "Closest neighbor, former ranger. Complains more than the weather, but he usually means well." Eben knocked once, then opened the door halfway. "Mara, you alive in here? Or did that roof finally win?" "I am alive, Eben. Shame. I had $10 riding on the roof." His gaze landed on Torin, then Alder. His humor faded just enough to show caution but not fear. "Well," Eben said, "that's new." Torin nodded once. "Torin Hayes, Eben Pike." The older man looked at Alder. And that fellow? Alder. Eben studied the dog's posture and the K9 tag on his collar. Working dog, yes. Good. House could use someone with sense. Mara gave him a look. Did you come all this way to insult my guest? No, that's just a bonus. Eben held up the envelope. County sent another notice. Thought I'd bring it before it sat in your box all weekend. Mara's face changed. It was quick, but Torin saw it. The way her shoulders drew inward, the way her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I'll look at it later, she said. Eben did not move. Mara. Later. The room fell quiet. Torin looked from Mara to the envelope. Alder stood slowly. Perhaps it was the tension in Mara's breath. Perhaps the sudden bitter smell of fear that humans tried to hide and dogs never missed. The German shepherd crossed to her side and pressed his shoulder gently against her knee. Mara closed her eyes. The envelope slipped slightly in Eben's hand, and Torin saw the red letters stamped across the front. Delinquent property tax notice. Final warning. Outside, the forest glowed in the last clean light after rain. Inside Lantern Hollow, the house that had remembered 100 strangers seemed to hold its breath again. Eben Pike did not sit down when Mara told him to. That alone told Torin Hayes the envelope was worse than the old woman wanted to admit. The former ranger stood near the kitchen table with rain-damp boots planted on the braided rug, his moss-brown jacket hanging loose over a dark green flannel shirt. His face, weathered by 76 Maine winters, carried the kind of discomfort men of his generation tried to disguise as irritation. Mara stood across from him, small and straight in her cream cardigan and pale gray-blue dress, one thin hand resting on the table. Her pale blue eyes had gone distant. Alder remained at her side. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 pressed his shoulder gently against Mara's knee, his black and tan coat still faintly smelling of wet pine and hearth smoke. His amber eyes moved from Eben's hand to Mara's face, reading the room with a discipline no human had taught him fully. Some instincts were older than training. Torin looked at the red letters on the envelope. Delinquent property tax notice. Final warning. How bad? Torin asked. Mara turned slightly. It is not your concern. That wasn't the question. Her mouth tightened. Eben sighed, removed his gray knit cap, and rubbed a hand over his thin white hair. Mara, he already saw it. He is a guest. Guests don't usually fix back doors, gutters, and porch rails before lunch. Torin said nothing. Mara looked down, as if the table grain had suddenly become a scripture she could read her way out of. At last she took the envelope from Eben and opened it. The paper trembled once in her hand. It started with the senior tax deferral, Eben said quietly. She qualified for it years ago. Then she was hospitalized that winter. Forms got delayed, county changed software, and suddenly the old deferment didn't renew right. Mara's voice stayed soft. The original amount was not impossible. No, Eben said, but penalties grew teeth. Torin's jaw worked once. Eben continued. Back taxes, interest, survey fees, late processing, legal notices. They've got it over 12,000 now. 12,000, Torin repeated. The number sat in the room like a stone dropped into a well. Mara folded the paper carefully, though her fingers shook. I kept thinking I would catch up. One repair became another. Medicine, heating oil, roof patch. Then the property survey dispute began. Torin looked to Eben. Survey dispute? Eben's expression hardened. Briar Lake Timber and Resorts. He said the name as if it tasted like a rusted nail. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Eben leaned one hand on the chair. They've been buying land around Briar Lake for 3 years. Logging roads, lake frontage, old hunting parcels. Folks thought it was just timber at first. Then came talk of cabins, spa lodges, luxury trails, all that polished nonsense people build when they think a mountain is only pretty if it makes money. Torin glanced toward the windows. Outside, the forest after rain glowed fresh and green, innocent of paperwork. This cabin blocks something, he said. Eben looked at him with new interest. You catch on quick. Men with money don't chase old houses unless the dirt matters. That dirt, Eben said, pointing toward the North Ridge, is the cleanest access between the lake road and the high trail. Briar Lake owns parcels on both sides. Mara's land sits in the middle like a stone in their boot. Mara's voice was calm but tired. They sent letters saying part of my access road may fall under an old logging easement. From the 1930s, Eben added, seasonal haul rights. Not ownership, not development rights. But the county digitized some old maps wrong, and Briar Lake is leaning on the confusion. Torin felt heat rise in his chest, not from the fire. He knew this kind of enemy. Not a man in a doorway, not a rifle on a ridge. A machine made of signatures, pressure, and polite threats. The sort of thing that broke people slowly, then called it procedure. Who runs it, he asked. Local face is Grant Voss, Eben said. 46, clean shoes in muddy places, dark navy wool coat even when he's pretending to inspect timber. Sharp face, square chin, ash-brown hair slicked back like he is afraid one honest breeze might ruin him. Smiles at widows the way a bank smiles before taking a house. Mara gave him a warning look. What? Eben said. That was me being gentle. Torin turned back to the envelope. And if the money isn't paid before the end of spring, Mara said the county can move toward tax foreclosure. The words did not crack. That made them worse. Torin wanted to say what soldiers always wanted to say when helplessness entered a room. Give me a target. Give me a plan. Give me a door to kick down. But Mara looked at him as if she already knew. Do not turn this house into a battlefield, she said. It has held enough sorrow. The sentence stopped him. For a second, rain was not rain in his memory. It was dust. Radio static. A man named Reed calling from behind smoke while Torin dragged civilians toward extraction because orders said there was no time to go back. He lowered his eyes. Yes, Mom. Mara, she corrected softly. He nodded once. Mara. The next few days did not feel like a decision. They simply happened. Torin told himself he was staying until the truck could be repaired and the worst of the paperwork was understood. He slept in the chair by the window, Boots nearby, one ear always awake. But every morning he found another thing needing hands. A sagging shelf, a loose storm shutter, a split step, a woodshed door swollen crooked by rain. Fixing things kept his mind from circling the old battlefield inside him. Alder began to move through Lantern Hollow as if he had accepted Mara into his unit. When she walked to the porch, he followed 3 paces behind. When her right hand trembled while she counted pills near the kitchen sink, he stood close enough for her to rest her fingers on his head. When a truck passed far down the road, he lifted his ears and positioned himself between Mara and the front door. Mara noticed every bit of it. Sometimes her eyes softened with gratitude. Sometimes they filled with pain. Once, when Alder lay near her rocking chair, she whispered, "North used to do that when Jonah came home too tired to speak." Torin pretended not to hear. The house grew warmer in small, dangerous ways. On the 4th afternoon, Mara led Torin to the old workshop behind the cabin. The building leaned slightly, silvered by years of weather, with moss gathered along the roofline. Inside, dust floated through shafts of sunlight. Old tools hung on pegboards. Wood shavings slept in corners. The air smelled of cedar, varnish, and time. Mara's late husband had left behind shelves of handmade pieces, birdhouses with tiny carved shutters, mailboxes shaped like miniature cabins, picture frames inlaid with maple leaves, small wooden crosses polished smooth, a child-sized rocking chair, lantern stands, even a carved model of Lantern Hollow, complete with a tiny porch light. Torin lifted one birdhouse. The joints were clean. The carving was careful. "These are good," he said. "They were Daniel's," Mara replied. Her husband, Daniel Whitlock, appeared in one framed photograph on the workbench. A tall, broad-handed man with a sun-browned face, kind hazel eyes, and a thick gray beard. He wore a faded work shirt and had the easy smile of a man who trusted wood more than words. He used to say, Mara continued, "Every broken board is just waiting to become something kinder." Torin looked around the workshop. "Why didn't you sell them?" Mara laughed softly, without much belief in it. Who would buy old things from an old cabin at the end of a wet road? "People buy stories all the time," Torin said. "They just don't always know that's what they're buying." She studied him. He shrugged. "You have a laptop? A very slow one." "That's still a yes." When Torin began arranging the wooden pieces for photographs, Alder walked past the shelves and stopped at the smallest object in the room. It was a plain birdhouse, unfinished, pushed behind a stack of scrapboards. The dog lowered his nose and nudged it forward. Mara went still. Torin picked it up carefully. On the bottom, burned into the wood in Daniel's neat hand, were 4 words. "For the next light." Mara pressed her fingers to her mouth. "That was the last one he started," she whispered. "After Jonah died, Daniel never finished it." Torin looked at the little house, its roof incomplete, its doorway open and waiting. For reasons he could not explain, it felt less like an object to sell and more like a question. That evening, Torin used Mara's old laptop at the kitchen table while the fire crackled and rain began tapping again on the roof. The internet connection crawled. Twice the page froze. Once Torin muttered something under his breath that made Mara raise an eyebrow. "I thought Navy men were patient," she said. "We are, with bullets." She smiled despite herself. He uploaded photographs of the handmade pieces, then wrote a short description. Handmade pieces from Lantern Hollow, a century-old cabin in northern Maine that once sheltered travelers through storms. Every purchase helps keep the light on. Mara read it 3 times. "It sounds too grand," she said. "It sounds true." The first order came the next morning. A picture frame. Then a birdhouse. Then 2 crosses from a woman in Vermont whose grandfather, she wrote, had once spoken of a cabin that gave him soup during a blizzard. Mara stared at the screen as if the small numbers were stars appearing before dusk. By noon, there were 5 orders. By afternoon, Eben arrived carrying coffee so strong it could have negotiated with bears. "I may have mentioned the cabin at Mabel's diner," he admitted. Mara looked at him over her glasses. "Mentioned? Briefly." "How briefly?" "Depends how you define an hour." Mabel's diner sat in town near the post office. a low white building with red trim and windows that fogged whenever soup was on. Its owner, Mabel Crowley, was a round-faced woman in her 60s with silver curls, flower on her sleeves, and a heart that fed people first and asked questions later. If Eben had told the story there, half the county would know by supper. 2 days later, a car pulled up the muddy drive. The woman who stepped out moved quickly, holding a notebook under her denim jacket to protect it from drizzle. She was 34, petite and alert, with warm brown observant eyes and a friendly smile sharpened by a reporter's habit of noticing what others missed. Her chestnut brown hair fell to her shoulders in soft waves, half tied back for work. She wore a dark blue denim jacket with thin fleece lining, a cream turtleneck, light brown khaki pants, brown ankle boots, and a leather crossbody bag carrying a pen, small recorder, and folded newspaper. "Lena Hartwell," she said at the door. "Mara, you probably don't remember me." Mara studied her face. Lena's smile softened. "My mother was Annie Hartwell. Our car got stuck on Briar Road in the blizzard of '98. You kept her fever down all night while my dad walked for help." Mara's eyes widened. Little Lena, not so little now. Mara opened the door and pulled her into an embrace. Torrin stood back, uncomfortable with the sudden tenderness, while Alder sniffed Lena's boots, approved whatever story the mud told him, and sat down. Lena had not come to make Mara an object of pity. She said so clearly over coffee. She wanted to write about Lantern Hollow as a piece of living history, a refuge the town had nearly forgotten. "People remember places when someone gives them language," Lena said. "This place deserves to be remembered before men in clean coats rename it something like Briar Ridge Luxury Escape." Eben snorted. "Told you. Clean coats are dangerous." Lena interviewed Mara gently. She photographed the old letters, the handmade pieces, the lantern, the porch, the forest road. She asked Torrin only 2 questions and accepted his short answers without prying. For that alone, he almost liked her. By evening, the cabin felt charged with a strange, fragile hope. Mara packed the first orders with tissue paper and handwritten thank-you notes. Torrin repaired the workshop door. Alder lay on the porch, watching the road as fog gathered between the trees. Night settled cold and wet. The lantern outside burned steady. Then Alder rose, no growl at first, just a shift in weight. Torrin, inside near the fireplace, looked up. Alder's ears locked forward. A second later, the dog barked, sharp, deep, not warning the wind. Torrin grabbed his jacket and moved to the door. Alder, the German shepherd, was already down the steps, body low, heading toward the roadside sign. Torrin followed into the rain. The yellow light from the porch reached only so far, but it was enough. The wooden sign that read Lantern Hollow had been torn from one post and cracked across the middle. Beyond it, the fence near the old access road had been cut clean through. Fresh tire tracks pressed dark arcs into the mud. Alder stood beside them, rain shining on his black and tan coat, a low growl rolling in his chest. Torrin crouched and touched the edge of one track. The mud was still soft. Whoever had come to Lantern Hollow had not been gone long. Morning revealed what darkness had tried to hide. The rain had stopped, leaving Lantern Hollow washed in pale sunlight, but the damage near the road looked ugly against the clean forest. The wooden sign lay split in the mud. One post leaned like a broken bone. The fence near the old access trail had been cut with something sharp, not snapped by weather or deer. Torrin Hayes crouched beside the tire tracks. At 43, the former Navy SEAL still moved with the controlled patience of a man trained to read disturbed ground, broken branches, and the silence after violence. His olive field jacket was damp at the shoulders, his dark blue cargo pants stained with mud at the knees, and his deep gray blue eyes narrowed as he studied the earth. Alder stood beside him, black and tan coat gleaming in the morning light. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 lowered his nose to the tire marks, then to a boot print near the cut fence. His ears angled forward. His body stayed calm, but his focus sharpened. 2 men, Torrin said. Eben Pike, the old former ranger, leaned on the fence post and squinted. His gray knit cap sat low on his white hair, and his weathered face looked carved from irritation. "You can tell that from mud?" Torrin pointed. "Different tread depth. One heavier. One turned his left foot outward. They weren't here to rob her." "No," Eben muttered. "They were here to make the place look abandoned." Mara Whitlock stood a few steps behind them, wrapped in her cream cardigan, one hand at the lantern charm on her necklace. Her pale blue eyes moved from the broken sign to the cut fence. She did not cry. Somehow that made her sadness worse. "They wanted people driving by to think nobody cares for it anymore," Torrin said. Eben's mouth tightened. "Or to help a county inspector think the place is unsafe." Alder moved suddenly toward the edge of the trees. He did not bark. He followed a scent, slow and deliberate, through wet grass and fern. Torrin let the leash slide longer and followed. The dog stopped near a mossy stone, half buried beneath roots. Eben's expression changed. "Well, I'll be hanged." Torrin looked at him. "That stone?" Eben said, stepping closer. "My father showed me one like it when I was a boy. Boundary marker. Whitlock land." Mara frowned. I thought the old markers were farther north. Some were, some weren't. Eben knelt with a grunt and brushed away moss. Beneath the green was a faint carved W. Torin looked back toward the cut fence. They were cutting near the boundary, near the part Briar Lake claims got swallowed by that old logging easement, Eben said. If enough of these markers still stand, the county map may be wrong. Alder sniffed the stone once, then looked at Torin as if the forest had offered the first honest witness. By noon, Lena Hartwell's article went live. The title appeared simple and strong. The Cabin That Kept Its Light On. Lena had written with the careful warmth of someone who understood that pity could bruise. She told of Clara Whitlock and the refuge built after the winter storm of 1929. She wrote of Mara, the retired nurse who had lived alone too long. She wrote of Jonah and North, of travelers who had survived blizzards because a door opened, and of a former Navy SEAL and his K9 who had arrived in the rain just as the cabin's own light was in danger. The story moved faster than anyone expected. Orders for Daniel's woodcrafts doubled before supper, then tripled. Mara sat at the kitchen table with a stack of brown paper, twine, and handwritten notes, her thin hands moving slowly but steadily. Every time an order printed, she looked at it as if someone had mailed her a small proof that the world had not forgotten. Letters came too. An elderly man from Bangor wrote that his grandfather had once slept beside the Lantern Hollow fire in 1958 after his truck slid into a ditch. A retired nurse sent $50, and a note saying Mara had cared for her sister without charging a dime. A Vietnam veteran mailed an old unit patch and wrote, "I did not sleep for 3 years until I slept under that roof." Torin read that one twice. Then he folded it carefully and said nothing. Hope, however, had a way of attracting teeth. 2 days after the article, a rumor began moving through town. It started online under the article, from an account with no real name. Then someone repeated it at the post office, then at Mabel's diner. By afternoon it had grown legs. The man staying at Lantern Hollow was unstable. He was homeless. He was using a lonely old woman. Maybe he wanted the cabin for himself. Torin heard it from Lena, who arrived with her face tight and her notebook clenched in one hand. "It is coordinated," she said. "Same phrasing, same accusations. Someone wants the town looking at you instead of Briar Lake." Eben spat into the mud outside the porch. Grant Voss smiles with clean teeth and hires dirty hands. Mara's eyes flashed. "Eben, what?" Still gentle. Torin stood near the woodshed, silent. The rumor should not have mattered. He had survived worse names from better men. But this one entered through an old wound. Years earlier, after the mission that killed Reed, Torin had been questioned for hours, every choice measured, every second replayed. Why did he move civilians first? Why did he not return? Why did one man die while others lived? He had been cleared. The paper had said his decision saved 5 lives. His heart had never signed that report. Now, hearing strangers suggest he was dangerous to Mara, something inside him stepped backward. That Saturday, the church held a small craft sale and fundraiser in its fellowship hall. Reverend June Mallory organized the tables herself. She was a short, sturdy woman in her early 60s with silver hair cut close to her head, dark skin warmed by laugh lines, and a voice that could soften a room without losing authority. She wore a navy sweater, a plain wooden cross, and practical black shoes. She had the air of a woman who had buried half the town, baptized the other half, and still believed soup could solve more emergencies than politics. "Lantern Hollow fed my uncle during the ice storm of '79, she told Torin while setting out donation jars. "So today, the church feeds Lantern Hollow." Torin gave a small nod. "Appreciate it. You can appreciate it by carrying that table." "Yes, Mom," Mara smiled at that. People came in waves. Some bought birdhouses and crosses. Some brought cash in envelopes. Some came only to look at the photographs Lena had printed from the old letters. The room smelled of coffee, baked beans, pine boards, and winter coats drying near the heaters. Alder lay beneath Mara's table, calm but watchful. Then a young man entered and stopped just inside the door. Micah Bell was 29, though exhaustion made him look both younger and older. He stood about 5'9", slim, with slightly slumped shoulders and a pale face marked by sleepless nights. His brown eyes sat hollow beneath uneven dark blonde hair that looked as if he had cut it himself and regretted nothing because regret required energy. A faded gray hoodie showed beneath an old moss-green military jacket. His dark jeans were frayed at the knees, his black boots worn thin, and a faded canvas backpack hung from one shoulder like something he never dared put down. He looked at the tables, the people, the exits. Torin recognized the scan immediately. Combat medic, maybe. Or someone who had learned where doors were because his body no longer trusted walls. Alder lifted his head. Micah bought nothing at first. He stood near the coffee urn, hands shaking slightly around a paper cup. Reverend June spoke to him kindly, and he answered with a quick nod. Too quick. Too controlled. Then the microphone near the front gave a burst of static, a small sound, a harmless sound. Micah's face emptied. Alder stood before anyone else noticed. The dog did not bark. He walked straight through the crowded fellowship hall, past tables and chairs and people calling his name, toward the young man who had begun backing toward the side door. Micah's breathing grew sharp. The microphone crackled again. Alder reached him and pressed his body sideways against Micah's knees, grounding him with warm weight and steady breath. Micah looked down at the dog, and his face crumpled with a grief so sudden that even the room seemed to lower its voice. Torin saw it then. Not a stranger losing control, but a younger version of himself standing at the edge of a cliff no one else could see. Micah pushed through the side door. Alder followed. So did Torin. He found them behind the church near a row of trash bins and leafless lilac bushes. Micah crouched with one hand against the brick wall, trying to breathe quietly, as if even panic had to be polite. Alder lay down between him and Torin, head on his paws, breathing slow and deep. Torin did not ask what happened. He sat on the cold ground a few feet away. For several minutes, the only sounds were traffic on the distant road, wind moving through bare branches, and Micah fighting his way back into his own body. At last, Micah whispered, "I'm sorry." Torin looked ahead. "For what? Making a scene?" "You didn't." "I did." Torin shook his head. A microphone made a noise. "Your body remembered something it survived." "That is not a scene." Micah swallowed hard. "I was a medic," he said after a while. "Convoy outside Mosul. Radio went bad before the blast. Static first. Always static first." Torin's chest tightened. He did not say he understood. That phrase was too often stolen by people who did not. Instead, he said, "You eat today?" Micah gave a broken laugh. "That's your medical advice?" "No, that's step one." Alder's tail moved once. When they returned inside, nobody stared. Reverend June simply handed Micah a bowl of stew as if he had stepped out to check the weather. Mara placed a chair beside her table. Lena quietly turned the microphone off. Torin watched it all and understood something he had not expected. Sometimes saving a man did not mean dragging him from gunfire. Sometimes it meant sitting beside him in the cold until shame got tired and left first. That night, back at Lantern Hollow, the rumor returned to Torin like a bad taste. Mara was asleep. Eben had gone home. Lena's article was still spreading, and so were the lies beneath it. Torin packed in silence. 2 shirts. A field knife, spare socks, old papers, nothing that looked like a life. He told himself leaving was protection. If he vanished, Briar Lake could not use him against Mara. If the town stopped whispering about the damaged veteran at her cabin, maybe the story would become clean again. He reached for his jacket. Alder entered the room carrying something in his mouth. The side door key. The dog dropped it at Torin's boots, then lay down in front of the door. "Alder," Torin said quietly. The dog did not move. "Alder, move." Still nothing. Behind them, a floorboard creaked. Mara stood in the hallway wrapped in a shawl, her gray-silver hair loose around her face. She looked at the packed bag, then at the key, then at Alder. "I wondered how long fear would let you stay," she said. Torin looked away. "This is hurting you." "No, leaving would. They are using me. They are using your pain. There is a difference." He had no answer for that. Mara walked slowly to the table and sat down. After Jonah died, there was a night in January. Snow so thick the windows went white. Someone knocked on that door. Torin stood still. "I heard it," she said. But North had been gone only 3 weeks, and every sound outside felt like the night my son did not come home. I stood there, frozen. I waited too long. Her voice trembled. The man survived. Eben found him in the shed and brought him in. But I never forgave myself for those minutes. I told myself I was protecting what was left of my heart. Really, I was locking love outside with the cold. Torin looked at her then. Mara's pale blue eyes held his without judgment. "A closed door can make sorrow feel safer," she said, "but it also keeps grace from finding its way back." Alder gave a soft breath at Torin's feet. Mara looked down at the dog and almost smiled. "If you leave because you are afraid of harming me, then you are letting pain decide the kind of man you become." She paused, her voice gentler now. "And I believe Alder is tired of being wise for both of us." The key remained on the floor between them, small and bright in the lamplight. Torin stayed, not because fear had vanished. Fear did not leave a man like smoke through an open window. It settled in the bones. It waited in quiet rooms. It spoke in the voices of the dead when the house grew still. But for the first time in years, someone had seen Torin Hayes standing at the edge of leaving and had not begged, blamed, or judged him. Mara Whitlock had simply held up a lantern to the truth. Running away was not the same as protecting someone. So at sunrise, he unpacked his bag. He did it without ceremony, placing 2 folded shirts back into the small corner Mara had cleared for him near the hall closet. Alder watched from the rug, his black and tan body stretched beside the door, his amber eyes calm with the satisfaction of a soldier whose stubbornness had won the battle without firing a shot. "You look proud of yourself," Torin muttered. Alder thumped his tail once. In the kitchen, Mara wrote thank you notes at the old table. Her cream cardigan hung softly from her narrow shoulders, and the lantern charm at her throat rested against her blouse. Her thin hands trembled when she folded each letter, but her handwriting remained careful and elegant. $5, she said, holding up one envelope. From a woman in Millinocket, she wrote that it was all she could spare. Torin poured coffee. That matters, Mara smiled. A small gift is still a candle if it is given at the right hour. By mid-morning, Lena Hartwell arrived with a box of copied records balanced on her hip. The young journalist looked more determined than rested. Her chestnut brown hair was half-tied, her denim jacket damp from mist, and her warm brown eyes carried the bright exhaustion of someone who had spent too many hours in old newspapers and not enough in bed. I found 3 articles, from the 1940s, Lena said. 2 blizzards, 1 missing logger, all mentioning Lantern Hollow. Also a church ledger from 1953 listing the Whitlocks as emergency shelter volunteers. Eben Pike came in behind her, carrying a rolled map and a paper bag of biscuits from Mabel's diner. The old ranger's gray cap sat crooked on his head, and his weathered face wore its usual expression of mild complaint. Mabel says if you all don't eat, she'll come up here herself, he announced. Nobody wants that. Woman can shame a bear off a salmon. They spread the records across the table. Newspaper clippings, old photographs, church notes, ranger reports, survey copies. The cabin seemed to fill with voices from decades past. There were names in faded ink, families who had come through snow, men who had broken axles on mountain roads, nurses, loggers, soldiers, widows, children. People who had entered Lantern Hollow as strangers and left with warmth inside them. Still, memory was not law. That was what Caleb Rusk told them when they visited his small office above the old pharmacy in town. Caleb was 68, tall and thin, with a straight-backed posture that made even retirement look formal. His long face was sharp at the chin, his gray eyes cool behind thin-framed glasses resting low on his nose. His silver-gray hair was combed neatly to one side, thinning at the temples but carefully kept. He wore a charcoal gray wool coat over an ivory shirt and dark brown sweater vest, gray dress pants, and polished black leather shoes that looked too disciplined for a dusty office. He listened without interrupting. That almost made him intimidating. When Lena finished explaining, Caleb removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Old letters are moving, he said. They are not, by themselves, a defense against a land claim. Mara sat quietly across from him. Her face did not harden, but Torin saw the way disappointment lowered her shoulders. Caleb glanced at her and looked away too quickly. My answer is no, he said. Aben leaned forward. You haven't even looked at the easement. I know Briar Lake's attorneys. They have money and time. So do mosquitoes, Eben snapped. Doesn't make them right. Caleb's jaw tightened. Emotion will not win this. Mara stood slowly. No, but truth might. She did not mention his wife. She did not mention the long illness, the winter nights, the way Mara had sat beside Eleanor Rusk when everyone else had gone home. But Caleb remembered. It came into his face like a candle being lit behind a curtain. His late wife, Eleanor, had been a gentle woman with silver blonde hair, soft cheeks, and hands that loved embroidery even after sickness bent her fingers. Caleb had built walls around himself after losing her. Walls made of law books, schedules, and silence. He looked at Mara for a long moment, then he reached for the rolled map. I will review the documents, he said. That is not the same as promising victory. Mara smiled faintly. I have learned not to insult small miracles. Caleb found the crack in Briar Lake's claim that afternoon. The logging easement from the 1930s allowed seasonal hauling across a narrow strip of land for a fixed period. It did not grant ownership. It did not permit development. It did not allow a company nearly a century later to redraw a mountain road because a computer map had swallowed history. The digitized county map appears to have copied from a 1974 secondary survey, Caleb said, tapping the paper. If we find the original Whitlock boundary map or enough physical markers, we can request a stay on foreclosure and challenge Briar Lake's interpretation. Eben's eyes sharpened. There are more stones. Then we find them, Torin said. The next morning, Torin, Eben, and Alder entered the woods north of the cabin. Sunlight fell clean through the wet branches. Blue jays flashed between the pines like scraps of sky. Alder moved ahead on the black tactical leash, nose low, body steady. He was not searching for miracles. He was reading the ground. Damp moss disturbed by old stone, human scent near places recently walked, metal hidden beneath wet soil. Near an ancient maple, Alder stopped. The tree rose wide and red-barked, roots gripping the hill like old fingers. Alder sniffed the base, circled once, then pawed gently at a patch of earth where fallen leaves had gathered too neatly. Torin crouched. Something's here. Eben bent with a grunt. That maple. Daniel used to call it the old witness. Torin dug with a folding tool, careful and slow. 3 inches down, metal scraped. He cleared the soil and lifted out a narrow waterproof tube, rusted at one end but sealed. Mara was waiting on the porch when they returned. The moment she saw the tube, her face changed. "Oh," she whispered. "Daniel." Inside was a rolled copy of the original Whitlock boundary map, dry and intact. There were also survey notes in Daniel Whitlock's broad handwriting. Mara held the paper as if she were touching her husband's hand again. "He told me once," she said, voice trembling, "that he hid important things where the old maple still remembered the way home. I thought he was only being poetic." Caleb stared at the map for a long time after they brought it to him. Then, for the first time since they had met him, he smiled. "Poetry," he said, "is occasionally admissible." The proof gave them strength, but Briar Lake did not retreat. 2 county safety inspectors arrived the following week after an anonymous complaint. One was a tired man named Harris Doyle, heavy-set, balding, with kind eyes and a clipboard he seemed to dislike. The other was a younger woman, Priya Nair, with dark hair and a neat braid, a tan inspection coat, and a serious face that softened whenever she looked at Mara. They were fair. Not friendly, but fair. The porch rail needed reinforcement. 2 steps had to be replaced. The smoke detector system needed updating. The woodshed had to be cleared from the rear exit. Torrin accepted the list without argument. For 3 days, Lantern Hollow became a workshop of mercy. Micah Bell returned wearing his faded gray hoodie and old moss-green military jacket, still thin and nervous, but steadier when given tools and a task. He worked beside Torrin replacing boards, his hands careful and useful. Eben brought lumber in his pickup. Mabel sent blueberry pies and threatened anyone who forgot lunch. A broad-shouldered farmer named Amos Reed arrived with spare cedar planks. He had a red beard, sunburned cheeks, and the quiet generosity of a man who would rather lift heavy things than receive thanks. A retired Marine named Dale Harkins brought a toolbox older than Micah. Dale was 70, thick-necked, with a silver crew cut, dark skin, and a booming laugh that made the rafters seem sturdier. He had once spent a winter night at Lantern Hollow after his truck slid off the ridge road. "Didn't come to be sentimental," Dale said, handing Torrin a hammer. "Came because that old porch owes me a second cup of coffee." The work changed the cabin, not into something new, into something remembered. Fresh boards brightened the steps. The repaired sign stood straighter near the road. Sunlight poured through the trees while hammers rang, blue jays called, and laughter rose with sawdust. The fundraiser came that Saturday evening at the church. People filled the fellowship hall until Reverend June had to bring extra chairs from the choir room. Photographs lined the walls. Lena's articles sat on a table beside copies of Clara's journal pages. Daniel's woodcrafts sold faster than Mara could wrap them. One by one, people stood to speak. A teacher named Ruthie Caldwell, tall and thin with white hair pinned high, told how Mara had stayed after her shift to sit with Ruthie's husband until dawn. A mechanic remembered his father being pulled from a snowdrift and fed stew at Lantern Hollow. Dale Harkins held up his old Marine cap and said the first night he slept without a nightmare was beside the Whitlock fire. Then Micah stood. His hands shook. His voice did too. "I came here to buy a mailbox," he said, trying to smile. "I thought maybe if I had a mailbox, I'd eventually need a place to put it." A few people laughed softly. Micah looked toward Torrin, then Alder. "This was the first place that didn't ask me what was wrong with me. They asked if I had eaten." His voice broke. "Sometimes that is the first doorway back." Silence held the room. Torrin looked down. Then Reverend June called his name. He almost refused. His body already had the old instructions. Stay back, observe, never become the center of fire. But Alder was sitting beside Mara, his gray-touched muzzle lifted, his amber eyes steady. The dog looked like an old soldier guarding a queen. Torrin rose. He stood before the room in his worn olive jacket and scuffed boots, uncomfortable beneath every kind eye. "There are people," he said slowly, "who survive things and come home without knowing where to set their lives down." No one moved. Sometimes the world gets loud trying to fix them, but sometimes a door opens at the right time. A fire is lit. A dog refuses to move. Someone asks if they are hungry. He swallowed. That can do what noise cannot. Mara covered her mouth with one trembling hand. The fundraiser raised more than anyone expected, but not enough. Late that night, Caleb arrived at Lantern Hollow with the final count, the original map copies, and a letter from the county. His face told them before he spoke. "We have enough to strengthen the case," he said. "Enough to request review. Enough to slow them." Mara stood near the table, Alder pressed against her side. "But not enough to clear the balance," Torrin said. Caleb folded his glasses and set them down. "No, and Briar Lake has pushed for a final hearing." The fire cracked softly. "When?" Mara asked. Caleb looked at each of them in turn. 3 days. Outside, the repaired lantern glowed over the porch, bright against the dark trees. Inside, no one spoke for a long while, because hope had come close enough to touch, but not close enough to save the cabin yet. The morning before the hearing, Torrin Hayes found Mara Whitlock sitting beside the cold fireplace with Jonah's photograph in her lap. Outside, northern Maine was quiet in that strange way forests became quiet before weather changed. The pine branches barely moved. The birches stood pale and still. The sky above Lantern Hollow had the color of unpolished steel. Torrin had been awake since before dawn. He wore his slightly worn olive field jacket, red and dark blue plaid shirt, dark blue cargo pants, brown leather boots, and the old military watch on his left wrist. He had shaved only enough to keep the light stubble neat. His deep gray blue eyes looked rested to anyone who did not know him. Mara knew better. Alder lay near his boots, the 7-year-old German Shepherd K9, watching both humans with amber eyes that missed very little. His black and tan coat caught the firelight, his gray-touched muzzle resting on his paws, his scratched metal K9 tagged quiet against the black leather collar. Mara looked up. Her pale blue eyes were tired but steady. "You are walking like a man carrying a room full of ghosts," she said. Torrin almost smiled. "That obvious? To a nurse?" "Yes." He sat across from her. For a while, neither spoke. The cabin held the silence gently. Then Torrin told her the truth. Not the clean version. Not the kind men gave when they wanted sympathy without exposure. He told her about Reed, his closest friend in the teams. Reed had been broad-shouldered, loud, red-haired, and fearless in the reckless way only beloved fools could be. He told her about the final mission, about civilians trapped near a compound, about radio static, smoke, and a collapsing wall. "I had 5 civilians on my side," Torrin said. "Reed was pinned 2 buildings over. Command said, extract the civilians. No time to go back." Mara listened without interrupting. "I made the call, got the civilians out." His jaw tightened. "Reed died before the second team reached him." Alder lifted his head. "I was cleared. They said I made the right decision." Torrin looked at his hands. "But when someone says right decision, all I hear is Reed on the radio." Mara's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "That is why you try not to stay," she said softly. "If you never belong anywhere, no one can ask you to choose." The words entered him quietly, like a blade wrapped in cloth. Mara stood and crossed to the mantel. She removed Jonah's photograph from its frame, then slid her finger behind the backing. Something thin slipped free. A letter. "I found this after Daniel died," she said. "I read it once and hid it from myself." Torrin looked at the paper but did not reach for it. Mara unfolded it. Her hands trembled. The letter was written in Jonah's hand, younger and more hurried than Clara's careful script. "Mom, if I do not come home from some foolish rescue one day, do not let that be the reason you stop opening the door. I know you. You will blame the river, the mountain, the storm, maybe even kindness itself. Please do not. If one day someone comes to Lantern Hollow with the eyes of a survivor and a working dog beside him, do not treat him like a burden. People who rescue others sometimes need rescuing too. They just rarely know how to ask." Mara lowered the letter. The fire popped softly, though no flame was burning high. Alder rose, walked to Torrin, and placed his head on Torrin's knee. Torrin did not move away. For the first time in years, he let the weight stay. The town hall hearing began at 2. The room smelled of wet coats, paper, and old wood polish. Folding chairs filled quickly. Some people came for Mara. Some came because Lena Hartwell's article had reminded them of stories their grandparents once told. Some came because Briar Lake Timber and Resorts had promised jobs, paved roads, and money, and they wanted to hear which version of the future would win. At the front sat County Chairwoman Beatrice Hale, a woman in her late 50s with deep brown skin, silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun, and reading glasses hanging from a chain. She had a calm, judicial face and the tired patience of someone who had spent years listening to people confuse volume with truth. Beside her were 2 county officials taking notes. Grant Voss sat at the opposite table. In person, he looked exactly as Eben had described. 46, lean, polished, with ash-brown hair slicked back and pale steel-gray eyes that measured the room without warming to it. His dark navy wool coat hung over the back of his chair. His white dress shirt looked untouched by weather. A metal watch gleamed at his wrist. Beside him sat Meredith Crane, Briar Lake's attorney. She was around 40, tall and narrow, with smooth black hair cut to her jawline, sharp cheekbones, and a precise mouth that rarely softened. Her charcoal suit was immaculate. She carried herself like a blade kept in a velvet case. Caleb Rusk represented Mara. The retired land attorney stood straight in his charcoal coat and dark sweater vest, his thin framed glasses low on his nose. His voice was dry, controlled, and sharper than anyone expected from an old man called out of retirement. Briar Lake began with maps. Meredith Crane spoke of development, access, safety, tax delinquency, economic opportunity. Grant Voss added a softer voice, saying the company respected history, but could not allow sentiment to block progress. He referred to Lantern Hollow as an aging private structure with limited practical value. When he said Mara's age made continued management uncertain, Torrin felt his hands close into fists beneath the table. Alder, lying under Mara's chair, lifted his eyes to him. Torin breathed out slowly. Caleb rose. He placed the original boundary map copies before the county board. He explained the 1930s logging easement. He showed that it granted limited seasonal hauling rights for a period long expired. Not ownership, not resort access, not development authority. He compared the old survey with the digitized county map and pointed out the 1974 copying error. Then Lena Hartwell submitted archived articles, church ledgers, photographs, and witness statements. Eben Pike testified about the boundary stones. His voice was gruff but certain. "My father showed me those markers before Briar Lake's people were born," Eben said. "A computer can forget a mountain, stone does not." A few people murmured. Mara stood last. For a moment she looked impossibly small before the room. Cream cardigan, thin hands, pale blue eyes. A woman holding nearly a century of open doors against a table full of expensive paper. Her voice trembled. "Lantern Hollow is not valuable because it is old," she said. "It is valuable because people have survived there." Then she stopped. The room waited. Her hand shook so badly Torin thought she might sit down. He stood behind her and placed one hand gently on her shoulder. Alder remained beneath her chair, steady as a living promise. Mara looked down at the dog. Something passed through her face. North, Jonah, Daniel, all the names love had not managed to bury. She continued. "My family did not build that cabin to keep the world out. They built it so no one would face a storm alone. I am not asking this county for pity. I am asking you to look at the truth before you let someone call mercy useless." Silence followed. Chairwoman Hale recessed for 30 minutes. When she returned, her decision was measured but clear. The county would stay the foreclosure process pending full review of the boundary records. Briar Lake's activity near the disputed access corridor was to stop until the land office completed its examination. It was not victory, but it was light. That evening, Lantern Hollow filled with people after the hearing. Lena brought copies of the order. Eben brought coffee. Micah Bell came with fresh bandages for Mara's scraped knuckles from gripping the podium too hard. Then the second storm arrived. Wind struck first, hard enough to rattle the repaired windows. Rain followed, cold and slanting, turning the mountain road black. By 8 o'clock, water was running in silver lines down the porch steps. Eben's old Ranger radio crackled on the table. At first, it was only static. Torin's body tightened. Alder stood before the words came through. "Ambulance off Ravencut, elderly patient aboard, driver injured, no cell service, need assistance." The signal broke. Mara was already moving. Her nurse's hands, though trembling, became certain. "Blankets, hot water, first aid kit. Micah, check the emergency bag." Micah's tired brown eyes widened, but he nodded. "Yes, Mom." Eben grabbed his keys. "Truck's got a winch." Torin clipped the black tactical leash to Alder's collar. "Alder, track." The dog went to the door and barked once, sharp and final. The forest outside was chaos. Rain slapped Torin's face. Mud pulled at his boots. Eben knew the old road. Micah carried the medical bag, and Alder led them through darkness with his nose low, ears forward, body reading the storm as if it were a map. They found the ambulance tilted near the edge of Ravencut, its rear wheels sunk deep, headlights cutting weakly through rain. The driver, a woman named Rosa Delgado, was trapped against the wheel. She was in her mid-30s, compact and strong, with olive-brown skin, dark hair pulled into a wet braid, and a cut across her forehead. Even injured, her voice stayed firm. "Patient in back," she called. "Mr. Sloan, heart condition, keep him warm." In the rear, Edwin Sloan lay pale beneath emergency blankets. He was 82, thin and white-haired, with a farmer's large hands and frightened blue eyes that tried hard to be brave. Torin moved to secure a line. "Eben, anchor the winch to that pine. Micah, stay with the patient." The ground gave way under Torin's left boot. The world dropped. He slid hard down the muddy slope, catching a root with one hand. Rain filled his eyes. Above him, someone shouted his name. Then the radio static inside his skull returned, Reed's voice. "Torin, don't leave me." His body froze. Not from the cold, from memory. Alder came down the slope in a controlled scramble, claws digging into mud. The German shepherd pressed his chest against Torin's shoulder and barked again and again, deep and urgent, not at the storm but into Torin's face. Torin blinked. Alder grabbed the loose safety rope in his teeth and dragged it toward Eben's voice above. "Torin!" Micah shouted. "Hold the line!" The command reached him. This time he did not hear only Reed. He heard the living. Torin wrapped the rope around his forearm. Eben and Micah pulled. Alder braced against the slope, growling with effort, not strong enough to lift a man alone, but steady enough to keep the rope from sliding back. They hauled Torin up. Then they hauled Rosa out. Then they carried Edwin Sloan through rain, mud, and fear toward the cabin light. When they reached Lantern Hollow, the porch lantern burned gold against the storm. Mara opened the door before they knocked. She stood framed by firelight, small, gray-haired, and unshaken. "Bring them in," she said. Torin looked past her into the cabin, filling with blankets, steam, trembling hands, and warmth. and at last he understood. This was why the lantern had to live. Lantern Hollow became a rescue station before midnight. Rain battered the windows, wind shoved at the old porch like a furious shoulder, and muddy boots crossed Mara Whitlock's floor in a trail of fear and urgency. Yet inside the cabin, the fire held. The lantern over the porch burned gold, and Mara, 71 years old with trembling hands and tired, pale blue eyes, moved through the room like the nurse she had never truly stopped being. "Micah, pressure bandage," she said. Micah Bell, the young former combat medic with hollow brown eyes and a faded gray hoodie beneath his old moss-green military jacket, obeyed at once. His hands shook, but only until they touched the wound on Rosa Delgado's forehead. Then training steadied him. Rosa, the ambulance driver, sat in a kitchen chair with a blanket around her shoulders. She was compact and strong, olive-brown skin pale from shock, her wet black braid hanging over one shoulder. Even injured, she kept asking about her patient. "Mr. Sloan," she murmured. "Check him again." "We are," Mara said gently, "and you are going to sit still before I tie you to that chair with my best dish towel." Rosa gave a weak laugh. Near the hearth, Edwin Sloan lay wrapped in quilts. He was 82, thin, white-haired, with large farmer's hands folded over his chest and frightened blue eyes that kept finding the fire. Alder lay beside him, the old K9 tag on his collar glinting in the light. The German shepherd's black and tan body stayed close enough for Edwin's trembling hand to rest on his shoulder. Torrin Hayes moved through the cabin without asking where he fit. That was new. He fed the fire, checked the doors, dried the radio, carried water, and spoke through Eben Pike's old Ranger set to Edwin's daughter, who was trapped on the far side of a washed-out road. "He's warm," Torrin told her. "He's talking. Mara has him. The ambulance driver is conscious. Help can reach us after daybreak." There was a broken sob through the static. "Thank you," the woman said. Torrin looked across the room. Mara was adjusting Edwin's blanket. Micah was taping Rosa's bandage. Eben stood near the stove in his moss-brown ranger jacket, making coffee strong enough to revive the dead and possibly frighten them afterward. Torrin answered softly. Lantern Hollow did what it was built to do. For the first time in many years, the sentence did not feel like something meant for other people. It felt like something he belonged inside. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight broke over northern Maine with almost indecent beauty, as if the night had never clawed at the roof. The pines glittered silver. Water dripped from birch branches in bright beads. The red maples beyond the cabin held their wet leaves like small flags raised after a battle. County Rescue reached them after 8. Rosa was taken to the hospital for stitches. Edwin Sloan insisted on shaking Mara's hand before they carried him out. "My father spoke of this place," he whispered. "Said a cabin light once kept him from freezing on Briar Road." Mara's eyes softened. "Then your family has been here before?" Edwin looked toward Torrin, then Alder. "Seems some lights know when to wait." As the stretcher reached the porch, Alder suddenly stepped forward and placed one paw on the threshold. Everyone paused. The dog was not blocking the way. He was standing exactly between the storm-wet world and the warm room behind him, as if marking the line every lost soul crossed when fear finally gave way to mercy. Edwin Sloan lifted his shaking hand from beneath the blanket and touched Alder's gray-touched muzzle. "My father used to say," Edwin whispered, "that God sometimes sends the rescue before a man knows he is lost." Torrin looked at Alder. The German shepherd did not move. He only held his post calm and certain, while sunlight washed the porch gold. The story of the ambulance rescue traveled faster than any legal notice ever had. By afternoon, people in town were talking about how Lantern Hollow had taken in the injured when the roads failed. By evening, Lena Hartwell had written a follow-up article. Not dramatic, not sentimental, simply true. She described Mara's kitchen becoming an emergency room, Micah finding steadiness in service, Eben's old radio saving precious minutes, and a former Navy SEAL with his K9 leading help through the storm. Briar Lake Timber and Resorts had called Lantern Hollow impractical. The mountain had answered differently. A few weeks later, the county issued its final decision. The boundary map Daniel Whitlock had hidden beneath the old maple was accepted as consistent with the original survey. Eben's stone markers were confirmed. The 1930s logging easement was recognized as expired and limited, not a development right. The foreclosure process was canceled after the community fund paid the tax balance, penalties, and legal fees. Lantern Hollow was officially recorded as a historic mountain refuge site. Grant Voss and Briar Lake were ordered to stop activity near the disputed corridor. Mara read the letter twice at the kitchen table. Then she folded it carefully and cried without covering her face. Torrin did not speak. He simply placed a cup of tea beside her. Alder rested his head on her knee. Victory did not make the cabin grand. It made it busier. The sign by the road was rebuilt from cedar, carved by Dale Harkins and painted by 3 church ladies who argued about lettering for 40 minutes before admitting they all needed glasses. It read, Lantern Hollow, warm fire. Warm meal, open door. The porch rail was painted white. Flower boxes appeared beneath the windows, filled with red geraniums and mountain asters. The old workshop became half woodshop, half rescue supply room. Coils of rope hung beside shelves of blankets. First aid kits sat near boxes of canned soup. Daniel's tools were cleaned and returned to their hooks. Torrin did not announce he was staying. He said he would help a few more weeks. Then he said spring repairs needed finishing. Then summer came and he was still there. He trained Alder and 2 local search dogs in the meadow behind the cabin. He taught volunteers how to read weather, pack emergency kits, splint a wrist, and stay calm when fear wanted to shout. He helped Micah find part-time work at the Maple Ridge Clinic, then drove him to a veterans support meeting without calling it support. Micah grew steadier, not all at once, but in small brave inches. Mara changed too. She sewed a torn patch on Torrin's olive jacket without asking permission. He bought her arthritis medicine and left it by the kettle without mentioning it. She cleared a hook beside the door for his coat. He repaired Jonah's old rocking chair and left the scratches in the armrest because Mara said some marks were how wood remembered love. A year passed. Lantern Hollow's 100th anniversary arrived under a sky so blue it looked newly made. Cars lined the mountain road. Families carried pies, bread, coffee, old photographs, and stories. Lena arranged Clara's letters beneath glass. Caleb Rusk, stiff and dignified in his charcoal coat, read the county's historic refuge certificate in a voice that broke only once. Eben brewed coffee so strong Reverend June declared it a spiritual test. Alder lay beneath the old maple, muzzle a little grayer, amber eyes still bright. When the crowd thinned and the sun lowered behind the pines, Mara found Torrin on the porch. She held out a brass key. Torrin looked at it. Mara, it is the front door. You already have one. So should you. He shook his head. I do not want to take something that isn't mine. Mara smiled, the kind of smile grief earns when it has finally made room for joy. It has been yours since the night Alder brought you here, she said. I only took a while to make the extra key. Torrin stared at the small brass shape in her palm. He did not call her mother, not then. Some words were too sacred to force into a perfect moment. He simply accepted the key, bowed his head, and for the first time did not say he would leave. Years moved gently after that. Lantern Hollow remained a place of warm meals, wet boots, and second chances. Mara grew slower, but loneliness left her like a guest who had finally found the road out. Torrin worked part-time with the Mountain Rescue Clinic and spent the rest of his days keeping the cabin ready. Alder aged with dignity, his muzzle silvering, his steps slower, but his instincts still sharp enough to make every volunteer obey him before Torrin had to speak. Then, one rainy autumn night, 3 knocks sounded at the door. Alder rose first. Outside stood a young veteran in a soaked jacket, shivering under the porch light. He was thin, early 30s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, anxious hazel eyes, and the guarded posture of a man who expected rejection before kindness had a chance to speak. I'm sorry, he said. My car broke down. Could I just stand on the porch until the rain slows? Torrin looked at Mara. Mara nodded. Alder stood beside the door, old and watchful, like a soldier who had seen the circle close and begin again. Torrin opened the door wider. No one waits out a mountain storm on the porch of Lantern Hollow, he said. Come inside. Later, after the young man slept beneath a quilt and the rain softened on the roof, Torrin opened a new journal beside Clara Whitlock's old tin box. North's K9 tag hung on the wall beside Alder's spare collar. 2 brass keys rested on the wooden hook by the door. He wrote the first line carefully. Tonight, another soul came home. Outside, the porch lantern burned warmly through the rain, not because the cabin feared the dark, because somewhere beyond the pines, someone still believed they had been forgotten. And sometimes mercy did not arrive with thunder or shining wings. Sometimes it came on quiet paws, across wet wooden steps, leading a broken man to the door his heart had been searching for all along. Sometimes the miracle we pray for does not arrive with thunder in the sky or a voice from the clouds. Sometimes God sends it quietly through an open door, a warm fire, a faithful dog, or a stranger who chooses kindness when fear would be easier. Torrin came to Lantern Hollow believing he was only escaping a storm, but God had already prepared that little cabin, that lonely woman, and that loyal German shepherd for something far greater. He did not just find shelter that night. He found purpose. He found healing. He found a home. And maybe that is true for many of us too. In everyday life we may pass people who are carrying storms we cannot see. A neighbor who feels forgotten. A veteran who is still fighting battles no one hears. An elderly person sitting alone behind a quiet window. A stranger who needs one kind word more than we will ever know. We may not be able to change the whole world, but we can keep one light burning. We can open one door. We can offer one meal, one prayer, one moment of mercy. Sometimes that is exactly how God begins a miracle. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not forgotten. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from, or share the name of someone whose kindness once became a light in your life. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, healing, faith, and second chances, please subscribe to Veteran and Dog so you do not miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort your heart, and place a light on your path whenever the road feels dark. May He remind you that no storm lasts forever, and no soul is ever beyond the reach of His love. Thank you for watching.